Well, this is a sad question, really, but it's one that is often asked, and it's one that we have to try to answer. Here it is. What words of advice and encouragement can I offer to someone who has been hurt by the church? What a sad question this is. What a sad request it is. Can I encourage people who've been hurt by the church? Let me try to answer it this way. In Ezekiel chapter 34, there's a powerful story. It's a story about what God had to say about the people of Israel. That is, the people through whom God was seeking to work to the blessing of the whole world. They've been set apart uniquely by God for his purposes. And he described them in a way that made an awful lot of sense to those people all those thousands of years ago, living out in the Middle East. He said that the people of Israel were like a flock of sheep, but he had put shepherds over them to lead them and to guide them. But Ezekiel chapter 4 is God's complaint against those shepherds, for they had engaged in unbelievable abusive leadership. Now, when people talk about being hurt by the church, that can mean different things. But let me talk to you first of all about churches where people are being abused by the leadership. The abuse that is described in the Ezekiel chapter 34 story, and I strongly encourage you to read it, is the abuse of shepherds who are just not caring for the sheep and leaving the sheep open to all kinds of abuse and bad experience and bad behavior. Now, of course, we could go into specific abusive behaviors of leadership in the church. Probably everybody listening to me right now can think of examples of leadership that has not behaved properly. What the scripture said in Ezekiel chapter 34 basically is this: if the leadership in the flock that God has placed us in is abusive, that leadership should be removed. That's very straightforward. That leadership should be removed. But of course, the sheep can't remove the shepherd very often. There's very often very little that they can do. If that is the case, then the person who is like a sheep in a flock that is being abused by the shepherd, and those abusive shepherds are not being removed, then the sheep should be removed to safer pastures and be cared for lovingly and with deep understanding and compassion. And quite frankly, in my many years in the pastorate and working in all kinds of churches in many different parts of the world, I've heard so many stories of people who've been deeply hurt by leadership that was far from building them up and caring for them, was doing things to them that were unspeakable. And many of them just have walked away from the church. They're like sheep who've been scattered from the flock, and Ezekiel chapter 4 describes this very graphically. And they finished up just being subject to all kinds of people who've made things worse for them. They should be removed from that abusive situation, but taken to safer pastures where they could be cared for. And not only have I been in many situations where I've seen a lot of people abused in churches, but I've also had the privilege of taking many of those people under the fellowship and care of the church that I was working in. And I think particularly of one lady who was a missionary down in South America for many years, and she was treated very, very badly indeed. Had a nervous breakdown, emotional breakdown, came back home a broken woman. And I came across her and I told her her place was on the back pew in our church, where she could sit there and just be loved on and cared for and encouraged. And I said, I want to check on you again in 12 months. I checked on her regularly in between, but I said, let's see how you're doing in 12 months. In 12 months, she had recovered. She was bright and sparkly again. God had done a work of healing in her life. She eventually became a key member on my pastoral staff. So that's the sort of thing that I would encourage people who've been subjected to abusive leadership. That's the sort of thing I would say. Make sure if those leaders are not removed, that you are removed from that abusive situation and taken to a place of healing and care. But the Ezekiel 34 passage doesn't just talk about bad leadership, it talks about bad behavior by the rest of the sheep. And in very graphic terms, it describes it. It says that these sheep, some of the people in the fellowship, they're just shouldering other sheep out of the way. They want to get to the fresh water. They want to get to the clean water. They want to get to the luscious grass. And they'll push their way through and knock other people out of it. And the people who are being abused by other church members now, they're like sheep left with muddy water and trampled grass. And their experience in the flock is not what it's supposed to be. Now, I'm sure you can tell me lots of stories about believers behaving badly, like sheep behaving badly in a flock. Well, what can we say to people where that is the case? Well, we can go back to Ezekiel chapter 34. And this is what it says to the people who've been hurt by other people in the flock. God says to them, but even though you are hurt, I always remember this, I am still your God. And remember this, you are still my precious sheep. And remember this, I am committed to blessing you and to making you a blessing. So don't focus on the hurt. Recognize that the church is made up exclusively of sinners. Sinners engage in bad behavior. Don't be too surprised and don't be so deeply hurt. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. Don't focus on the people who've hurt you. Don't focus on the hurt. Focus on the things that really matter. First, that really matters is God is still your God. Second thing that is so important is you are still his sheep that he loves and cares for. But thirdly, he is still committed to blessing you. And fourthly, he is committed to making you a blessing. So in the situation in which you find yourself, we're not talking about abusive leadership now, we're talking badly behaved sheep in the fellowship. Don't focus on them. Focus on what it means to belong to the Lord, the blessing that he's pouring into your life, and see if you can't be a blessing in that situation. Then there's the third possibility. In a community of faith, in a church, in the flock of sheep, things change. Things have to be changed. New things have to be done. People resist change. People resist new things. And sometimes the changes that have to be made for various considerations mean that the role of one of the sheep is changed as well. It's perfectly possible for people to get very hurt about this. They feel that they are being overlooked, and yet it's an organizational change that just has to happen. The danger then is for people to just walk away and become hurt, focus on the hurt and become increasingly bitter and estranged not only from the church or the community they were part of, but actually walking away from the faith altogether. Don't do that. If you've been hurt by organizational changes in the church that were necessary, that you don't think were necessary, then what you need to do is sit down with the people concerned and get understanding. Deal with these things with humility and call on God to give you the grace to accept the things that you don't necessarily want to accept and find other areas in which you can serve and grow and be nurtured. Well, I hope there's some words of explanation. I hope there's some words of encouragement for you there. And I'm just sorry if you've been hurt by the Church of Jesus Christ.